Welcome to episode 3 of the Queer Voices Sport podcast. In this episode, we meet Catrin Williams, a rugby player from Merthyr in South Wales. We hear about her life growing up in the game, the importance of the rugby family throughout her career, and how, in her 40s, she found support and acceptance from that family when she came out as a trans woman. Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. First of all, do you want to just introduce yourself and a little bit of your background, where you grew up and stuff?
So my name's Catrin. I come from Wales, Merthyr primarily in the valleys. Grew up, born, bred, still there. I did sort of migrate to West Wales for a little bit. Did come back. I suppose once a valley girl, always a valley girl.
Yeah.
It's very hard to get out of that mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What made you move to West Wales? Was that uni or work?
Opportunities really, and work. It was just something that presented itself at the time, made sense to stay there until that contract was over, then I moved back. So yeah, it was more through my self-employed work that I was doing at the time. So yeah, it just made sense for a little while. Long holiday really.
And obviously the Valleys is known for its rugby culture. Is it because of that you kind of first found yourself involved with rugby, or would you have been interested in it?
So
anyway,
really, I got involved in rugby. My father played for a club all his life. It was a big part of his life. He was actually my first coach for many, many years with one of his friends. So I suppose it was the natural way to go, father and son at the time, follow his footsteps. Yeah, I was a very small kid at the time, and just sort of hid in the background and done the sport because I thought that was the way I should be doing things, really.
Okay, so what kind of age were you when you first played?
It was comprehensive school I started playing. My father never let me play club rugby until I got to comprehensive school, which is a bit of a theme that I sort of encourage at the moment as well. I fancy kids, when they get involved with rugby too early, they burnt out by the time they get to senior level. Yeah. And they've had enough. So I don't actively encourage youngsters to sort of get involved with the club aspect. You hit comprehensive school, you're doing it within that sort of adult learning environment. And that I feel is the best time to enter the sport. So I was 11, 12 when I first started with the sport.
When you're saying that you wouldn't encourage someone to get involved with a club until that age, would you encourage them to get involved at school, or do you think best to just kind of leave rugby until that age?
So yeah, I think if the schools are doing it, because schools do such a huge curriculum, I think it's important for every child to sort of understand there's not just the one sport out there.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's important to see where you fit and have a good knowledge of what it is you're able to compete in if you want to compete. Keep an open mind, I suppose, is the way that there's far too much pressure I see through the grassroots game of the father pushing their son, and it's almost like living what you didn't have through your childhood, through your kid, and you can see it quite often. The kids that want to be there and the kids that really don't want to be there, and it can be counterproductive. It's also a money making machine with the WRU as well. So I don't think it's ever going to go away, which is a shame. Yeah,
it is a shame, isn't it? Because I think a more kind of long-term view of actually rugby is quite Marmite for a lot of young kids. The fact that all of a sudden you're having to run into people, tackle people, you're on the ground, in the mud, in the rain. It's not necessarily what every kid wants to do, but if they've, as you're saying with the wide curriculum at school, if they've had experience of other sports and they realise that they like being active, they like the team environment, then later on, as they kind of grow up and they've got a bit more autonomy, they might find that rugby actually is the thing they really like within sport. If they've been shoved that way.
It is, yeah. I mean, let's make no bones about it. A Sunday morning for a long, long time in my life used to be a lot of pain. So yes, after your Saturday game, it does hurt. You know, I think it's quite niche. You've got to be slightly crazy to like the sport, but I think that's sort of the element I like about it. You have to want to play. You can't just get on with it and put up with it. It's a sport you really have to enjoy.
So is your dad then with you through your whole kind of club career after you started? Was he there at most of your games?
So my father was still playing at the time as well, so he coached me through all like the Sunday sort of rugby. when I went to youth level, then that moved to a Saturday. He stayed with the junior side of things because he was playing himself on the Saturday. So I had quite a unique experience with my father. I played a lot of league games when I first get to senior rugby. He was still part of the second team, being the older person, stepping back. I was the younger element coming into senior rugby at the time. It was very competitive. So I spent a lot of time in second team rugby playing league rugby with my father. So where you see a lot of people doing it these days where they play the one game with their son. I've certainly done that with my son.
Okay, that's nice.
But it is just the one-off. But me and my father actually played league rugby together. It wasn't just a one-off. We trained and played together.
That's not as common. I mean, when I was playing for Ealing, there were a lot of dads there who were saying, I just want to get through to the point where I can play that one game with my son and then I'll retire.
Yeah.
But how did you find playing together? Was it a positive experience or?
It was, yeah. It's sort of when I noticed as well, because it was just sort of happening. Like these days, I think social media's got a lot to do with it. So it's a big sort of photo opportunity, and it's a big deal now. And it does sort of make me chuckle a little bit, because it's like, well, I done that and more with my father. It was, but it was sort of unnoticed, and it was just one thing that happened, really. It was quite uneventful.
When he got to the point where he wasn't playing in the seconds anymore, or was it the case that you moved up to the first? So how did your rugby journey continue at that point?
Rugby from there then, he never had any aspects of coaching the senior side. I mean, he sort of spent a lot of time with youth rugby, but I had obviously left youth rugby and into senior rugby by the time he stepped back. So he stayed involved with the sport, coaching youth on a Saturday. He's still out in the club after having his pint and what have you. I was playing senior rugby, and I did move around clubs a lot then as well. As the game got more competitive for me, positions, when you're talking back 20 odd years ago, it wasn't the participation that's in the sport now. Back then, there was a lot of competition, so if you weren't getting the game time you wanted, you'd move to the next club that wanted you in that position, and you spend a lot of time hopping clubs and chasing the game, I suppose. Yeah.
And how did you find the team aspect? I guess especially with moving clubs quite regularly, you're having to reintroduce yourself and get to know people on a fairly regular basis.
I moved around just within. Back then as well, there was a lot of clubs that you could play within your local area.
Okay.
So I didn't really travel far, and I'm quite well known through the Merthyr area with all of the clubs that are local. I other than Merthyr itself, I've played for every team in Merthyr. So yeah, it's but then that's a little rivalry that's between the rest of us and Merthyr that sort of happens. It's not so much these days, but back then it was very, very real rivalry.
And so were there other players that were doing a similar thing as well?
Yeah, there was a lot of players. Certainly, like the boys that were getting paid at the time, they would move more often than not, because they would be chasing the payment, really. They'd go to the highest bidder, I suppose. And you'd often see them wearing a Dowler shirt this week, but the week after they'd be in Kevin, or, they would chase the payment.
Yeah, I mean, people often talk about rugby as like the ultimate team game, and the bond between teammates in rugby is seen by people in rugby as being on another level to what you might get in other sports. Do you feel that was your experience in your playing days?
Yeah, best way to describe it is a family. So I find that the rugby world is his own family. You get your arguments in amongst it. You get the love in amongst it. It is a very unique bond. You don't sort of see it in any other sport quite like it is. I think the biggest reason you've got like the central club, where you've got somewhere you can drink and socialise together. So you have that meeting place that sort of where all your night out sort of start off. It's a homely environment. It's family is the biggest way to describe what rugby is.
I think that kind of chimes with the experiences I had, and I think that first point as well that you made about you have your arguments, and there's maybe a more distant relative that you might not choose to sit next to at a wedding or something.
That's
right, at the social, you might look to avoid them, but ultimately you're all part of that same community.
It is, and certainly when you play other sides as well, you almost get that aspect with them. I mean, you can really hit each other about on the field. You've been in situations where it's been a full-blown scrap and it's all busted up, 2 minutes later, the final whistle go, and you're sharing a pint with the person you just clocked in the face. It's quite. What happens out there stays out there. You know, we're all the same when we come back behind here, and you know,
it always makes me laugh actually how people not involved with rugby find that aspect so amazing, because it just when you're in rugby, it's you don't think any other way, right? You know that as soon as the whistle's gone, you're in the bar afterwards. Everyone's going to be friends.
That's right.
And you're going to be having, and you may well with that same player actually have a laugh on the pitch before the whistle's even gone for the end of the game. And you don't kind of think anything else of it, do you?
It's a mind game. It's sport. It's it's getting in the opposition's head, and but it is just that it's there for 80 minutes, maybe an hour before the build up, maybe, but. Once the final whistle's gone, that's the end of it till next season, I suppose, or the return fixture.
What age were you when you stopped playing regularly?
So I actually went to the police force when I was 24. So when I first joined, there was a chief constable at the time who wouldn't allow us to play sport in your probationary period. So I stopped playing at 24. And I went back into the game then probably around about 28, 29 when that chief constable moved on, and it was a little bit more easier to compete in sport again, and I went back to it. But I suppose that was my better era then. Sort of I developed a bit more. It was a good time when I went back into the sport. I took head injuries then for a while, so I think it was between 32 and 34 I never played because I had too many concussions, and I had to stop playing sport for that reason. But then came back and won cup finals with the second team again, sort of being the senior element. I actually captained the seconds at 36, I think it was.
Oh, nice.
I think I played my last game about 2 years ago, so I'm 46 now. So it's probably 44 playing my last game. Last game so far.
Yes.
There's always one left.
Never say never. Yeah. Did you ever have a side when you were in the police? Was there?
No, even though it existed, South Wales Police actually did still have a side. It was more sort of special constables and friends of police officers that were playing on that side. The actual professional element at that time was dissolved, which was a shame because it was quite a high ranking side at one time. I actually know police officers that were actually imported into the job purely because they could play rugby. They were the worst police officers under the sun, but they could play rugby, and they actually recruited them for them reasons, you know. So,
So you were playing kind of in your early 20s, your late 20s, a bit of a gap in your early 30s. But at what point for you was it that you started to realise that you were trans and had thoughts about how that identity and your rugby identity might come together?
Right. So I've known something's been wrong with my gender since the age of 2, maybe 3.
Okay.
You know, I've got some early memories of things that things weren't right. But growing up, when I did, you were taught that was wrong. So you almost convince yourself that it's wrong as well. What I liked about rugby, there was no time to think about your gender or anything like that. When someone's coming down your channel, you either had to put them over or be put over yourself. There was the gender aspect went away for them 80 minutes, so I didn't have to think about it.
So it's a bit of a release, kind of getting.
It was,
on the pitch.
and it certainly helped me create this other character. As I got better at the sport, you just sort of threw yourself at the sport, and all you could focus on was training, get to the gym, get better, be improved, get fitter. And it almost took over my life.
Did you sort of, whether it's conscious or subconscious, did you kind of think that by pushing and developing that rugby identity that you would get rid of your trans identity? Were you trying to do that, do you think?
You almost think that the more you do it, then it can't be happening. I mean, the hardest person to admit that I was trans to was myself, which actually I didn't do till I was probably 42, 43. Which, it's quite recent that I finally admitted to myself that, that I'm trans. I've tried trying to get into the box of, am I gay, am I bi, queer? You try so many boxes, and it's almost like it can't be the trans one, it can't be that box. You know, and it was blatantly obvious that's 100% the box I should have been going into, you know, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a kind of a common experience. I definitely had that with my sexuality, where I was like, it was like, say, so obvious, but
Yeah.
No.
Can't be that. It's
Yeah,
definitely
not me.
that.
No, I'm just friends with lots of people that are in that box,
Yeah.
and I don't have an issue with people in that box, but it wouldn't be me that's actually in it as well. But yeah, I mean, I think to then go through that with your gender as well. Did you have points where, perhaps when you weren't playing because of those concussions? Was that maybe a time where your trans identity was you were able to kind of evaluate it a little bit more and reconcile with it a bit more? Or?
So at that time I was in a relationship. So I was in a relationship where it was open that I liked to dress female, and I had outlets for it, and that sort of suppressed things for a while.
Yeah.
Where you'd be able to have that weekend away to a club, or you'd have that couple of hours in the house you'd be able to dress, but it's very secretive and. Yeah, I had an outlet for it, so it sort of took over. But I was still very much of the mindset then that it's just a thing I like to do. It's not a way of life, and the outside world can't know that about me. It's surprising what you do to your own head and build up these barriers that aren't really barriers, but they're very real in your head, and think, right, I got to stay behind this wall and keep this front up. And
I mean, you've talked about the rugby club and teammates being like a family. At that point, when it was secretive, did you ever think that you might be able to talk to someone within that rugby family?
Not at the time. So my coming out sort of became a process. The boys I was closest to got to know first, and then it got a little bit wider. To a point where I thought, right, they're the only ones that are close to me and accept me, and that's as far as it can go.
Yeah.
You do think you're going to lose it. You think that nobody's going to bother with you after they know. You build up this, well, if I do ever come out, my life's going to change. All that's going to be drawn a line under, and I'm never going to bother with that again, because I'm not going to be welcome in that sort of setup.
And you can't take it back.
Exactly,
once the words have come out of your mouth,
it's a big thing in here, coming out, and once it's out there, there's no way back. You can't undo that little bit of history of time. It's there. It's black and white. You can't sort of. I was actually joking about that. Exactly. It's very real, and pieces of the puzzle start getting put together at that point as well. So it's
that kind of close group of boys that you first told. What was the initial reaction you got?
As everything was done in drink, I sort of come out to them, and with it being in drink, the one boy who I'm closest to, he actually played at decent level at the Ospreys for a while, other than with injury and what have you, that took him out of the professional game. He sort of went off, but there was other things going on that night as well, so it was almost like I don't think he heard what I said, and I had to go up to his house because everybody else knew within our friendship circle. I feel like I got to tell him myself rather than them tell him. And it was sort of like a cup of tea moment. We were having a cup, and I said, I said something last night, and I told you that. And his reaction, and it sort of took me back. It was like, well, where's the reaction? That's something huge I've just told you. And it was the same person to me. It doesn't matter. And it was, I suppose, at that moment I thought, do you know what, this mightn't be as bad as I think.
Yeah, it's that strange feeling, isn't it, where you've built it up so much in your head, you're so convinced that you'll get a negative reaction, that when the reaction is sort of nonplussed, that doesn't change anything. It's almost, you almost feel like, well, hang on, I wanted something.
Where's this gone? But it wasn't even a moment. It was a nothing. It was almost like any other sentence over a cup of tea, and it had gone. It's just like, well, I built this drama up in my head. At least give me a little bit of the drama, satisfy what I thought I would have had. But
did you then get from that friend the sort of support to be able to say, well, actually, there are things I want to talk about because I've not been able to before?
Well, so this all happened around COVID times as well. So I mean, there was a lot of pubs shutting on us. We spent a lot of time unofficially, I suppose, together. And but it was a unique time. I was able to be myself around them then. There was no problems with them seeing me like that. And again, it sort of satisfied things for a while, where you were expressing who you were. Again, I didn't believe I was trans at that time.
Okay.
I just thought it was. I hate the word, transvestite is the common word I grew up with,
Yeah.
I don't really like that term, but that's what I thought, right, it's got to be that. I'm probably gay. That's enough boxes for me to be in, and that'll do.
So for you, transvestite as a term was that you wanted to be able to dress up as a woman, but you weren't a woman.
Yeah, I suppose that was the easier term to come to terms with. I was still hiding.
Yeah.
I can't be trans. It can't be that. I like rugby too much. I like. There's no way that my worlds can combine. So it has to be separate. It has to be two different entities. So yeah. So for a long time, I convinced myself that's all it was. But things just didn't satisfy. as always, it's like
that Pandora's box.
It's there. It's behind it. There's something jabbing you and say, you're still not right. It needed more.
In terms of that journey from that point to then being able to say, no, I am transgender and I am a woman, was rugby a positive environment and a positive influence in that journey, or negative, or was it separate?
It was separate for a while. I mean, the way that I came out was it was almost forced upon me. Rugby being rugby has loads of group chats and things like that, and I thought my Instagram female profile was quite hidden.
So you'd set up two separate
I was very two lives, even though by this point I knew that I was trans. I'd already been to a GP and started on waiting lists and things like that.
Okay.
The profile picture it's obviously quite small when it comes out, and it got shared into the group, and it was genuinely at the time believed it was just somebody that looked like me.
Okay.
And he thought it was funny. At that point, I had two options really. I could either go with the joke and laugh it off, or come clean. And I can remember having quite a lot of conversations with people who knew then at that point, is this something you want? And it was...
There were people in that group that knew?
Yes. So there was the guy I was coaching with quite closely with at the time. He was very much in that group and quite an influential figure as well. And he was like, they don't believe it's you. It's a joke. You can take this away. It'll all go away if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And it was at that point I thought I can't go through this stress and rigmarole. Of wondering when the next picture is going to pop up, and the next thing, it's very real, it's very out there, and there's no denying it that picture's being shared is me. It's not someone who looks like me, it's me. So at that point, I started the process of putting long-winded sort of accounts into WhatsApp groups, and then subsequently leaving them and telling committees and things like that this is what's going on, and that I suppose was the point where I realised just how much of a family we were within rugby, because the amount of support I had from that point on, it's just unreal. It really is. It's unreal. The people who reached out to me, the people you don't expect, they'll reach out to you. People you haven't spoken to for a long time through rugby because they part of different clubs and you don't see them that often. They took the time to find my phone number and get in touch with me and just basically reassure me everything's all right. It was quite a warming feeling and unique, and it's the one that I feared the most and thought I was going to lose everything, and I actually had everything to gain from it.
That's great.
So,
and I guess you kind of got ahead and controlled the narrative a bit more there by, no, I'm not going to let the second picture and the third picture.
That's it. I very much wanted to be in control of it. The only point that came out, my father didn't know, is obviously that's the biggest hurdle for me. It was back where we were talking about you can't take it back, is once I've told him that there's only two options. He's either going to support me or not support me. They were the only two options. I suppose in my head 95% knew he would support me, but there's always that element of doubt. You just don't know, and that small little doubt was enough for me to keep hiding and through a lot of tears and blubbering and things, I managed to get it out to him before I told all the rugby clubs and what have you, and sort of fessed up to everything, I suppose. I've obviously got the support 100% of my family. My family is absolutely amazing. So I think at that point when I knew my father's behind me. There was a lot of the fears went, and it was like, well, if nobody else wants to bother with me at that point, it doesn't matter because I have my family behind me anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a unique moment and something that's quite special to me. Really, it's stressful, tearful, emotional, but yeah, when you look back at it, it's positive.
Yeah,
very positive.
Do you have that feeling at all of why didn't I do this before? I know when I told people I was pansexual, I was like, I could have told people this 10 years ago. And
you do think that, and you think, I've wasted all this time, but then I don't know if I hadn't have been that character before, I wouldn't have been as well known, well liked.
Okay.
And you don't know whether you've had the same outcome and certainly the same positive outcome, because I like to think that I've opened people's minds up a little bit now that anybody can be trans.
Yeah.
You could be sat in a club and conversation, a lot of the conversation I heard used to put you off coming out, and it's all in jest, because when it comes down to it, if it's someone they know and it's someone they care about, then them conversations don't really matter. They will support you, whatever. So, their views don't really come into it. They can put the views to one side and, they can support you whichever way you need to. So I'd like to think if there's one message I can get out there is don't think because somebody hasn't told you they're trans that they're not trans.
Yeah.
Anybody, until you've actually been told they're trans, you don't know what's going on in that person's head. We're very good at hiding what we are and who we are, or a lot of us are anyway. And yeah, it's anybody could be sat next to you going through that.
Well, and also in that situation of, I've now found out my friend is trans, and of course I accept them because they're my friend and I've always liked them.
Yeah.
There could be someone who you know is trans from the first time you meet them, and initially people with kind of more traditional views might have not welcomed that person into a rugby environment or to another one, but actually there's no reason not to, because they can get on with them just as well as they get on with you.
That's it. I mean, to me, them are the people I really find brave, because they've embraced who they are from quite early on. They haven't built this character around them. They haven't built this sort of safe environment then, I suppose. They've expressed who they are, and whatever the consequences, they've taken that on the chin.
Yeah.
They're the people I really admire.
Yeah.
I wish I would have the strength to do that. But at the same time, I don't think I'd be who I am and where I am without doing it. So it's sort of a double-edged coin. That.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big believer that we are who we are on the basis of our experience and our journey and our story. And if you go back and you change an aspect of that, you're not going to be. Yeah, there's no point in wishing you could rewind time.
It's very much the butterfly effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's if it doesn't matter what you change, the path from that point is going to be different because of that changed aspect. So, yeah, I sort of accepted my life. I'm glad for what's gone on in my life, and I'm certainly proud of who I am now.
Catrin's story is an amazing one, with the support she received from her teammates setting such a positive example for how trans people can and should be listened to and accepted in the sporting environment. In the next episode, we hear about Catrin's journey with international gay rugby after coming out, and the home she has found with the Cardiff Lions, the IGR-affiliated club in the Welsh capital where she coaches. We also discuss how Catrin would like to see young trans players welcomed into the sport these days.